The sermon this morning is, the fifth in a series of sermons relating to the study of the confirmation class, all 50-some of whom are here with us again this Sunday. Voluntarily, I might add. Sort of, I might add. Second lesson is taken from the Gospel of Matthew, the 16th chapter. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do the people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, still others Jeremiah, one of the prophets." Jesus said to them, "But who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not stand against it." Last year, the Russian newspaper Izvestia asked Boris Yeltsin, as you know now president of the Russian Republic, why so many political leaders seem to be turning to God and the church again. And Yeltsin made this comment, "I will speak for myself. First of all, I am baptized. My name and date of birth, as was the custom, are written in the baptismal registry of the church. My grandparents were believers, as were my father and mother, until we left the country for the city. Later, in the course of an ideological formation at school and in university, I constantly heard, read, and, why hide it, felt and shared the most insulting opinions concerning the church and religion. This education was gravely wrong and seriously unjust. I now have the greatest respect for the church, for its history, for its contribution to Russian spiritual life, for its moral teachings, its tradition of mercy and charity. When I am in church, I light a candle. A religious service lasting 4 hours bores neither me nor my wife, and often when I leave, I feel that something new, something luminous has come into me. To tell the truth, I have found there is no room for halfway belief. I find the process is an ongoing task for my soul." Amazing. After 40 years of Cold War against an ostensibly atheist culture, the leader of a nation so foreign and far off speaks of sharing the same history and faith and commitments as you and I. A long time ago, a teacher out of Nazareth said, "I will build my church." And though he was a carpenter, he was not talking about construction, nor did he mean organization or ordination or icons or organs or committees or choirs or cathedral, as important as these all are. "You are Peter, the rock, and upon this rock I will build my church." And he's not talking about his person, he's talking about the faith he has just confessed. And he is talking about, the Greek word is ecclesia, he's talking about the community that is formed by that faith. So wherever people are together, because of that reality, out of common faith and mutual care and ultimate hope, there is the church. So church is you and me singing hymns here on Sunday morning, along with the priests and people of Yeltsin's congregation at Novodevichy Convent, and the choirs of St. Peter's in Rome, and the Good News folk north of Howard, and the Calvinist congregation of Debrecen, Hungary, and the Kenilworth Church of Johannesburg, South Africa. Did you know there was one? And the million-like gathering circling the globe this morning. But church is also third graders memorizing the Beatitudes with their teachers, and young people off on retreat in the North Woods, and caring friends visiting a sick room in the hospital, and boards meeting to run schools and homes and lend loans to third world entrepreneurs, and neighbors sharing hopes and concerns over morning coffee, and uncles Dutch, and mothers and dads leading young people to do their duty for God and country, and people recovering who gather around 12 distinct steps, and a friend who places a phone call to another in loneliness or need, and counselors seeking people come whole. This too is church, all of it. Church is wherever human beings who share something of his spirit, meet and lift and hug and listen and plan and encourage and labor and pray. I will build it, my church. So this means, first of all, and obviously, that we did not create it. Rather, the church has created us. The church has shaped us in ways that are central to our very being, essential to our lives. Most of us this morning are the creation of His Spirit in the church, in some community, somewhere. If not recently, then once upon a time, even if in rebellion, even if parts of our psyche are long unvisited. I'm a creation of the church. Well, I've done my remodeling, I've made my own adaptations over time, but the older I grow, the more I realize how much I am the creation of His community of faith and spirit. The communities of faith and spirit that I've been privileged to be a part of down through the years. Who am I today? I didn't invent me. I'm the sum of the little guy who marched a block and a half every Sunday morning to Mrs. Hart's third grade Sunday school class to marvel at Moses and the Red Sea on the flannel board, who drank in the ideals of life and love spoken there and prayed for in a home of that congregation. I know now they were woven into the very texture of my being, and I can't deny them, no matter how much I would want to. In the storm and stress of adolescence, my church heard the surge of my soul and taught me to set limits to my passions and to sing I Would Be True. At the lakesides of summer camp, I heard the challenge to make of my life a ministry and responded with a new sense of excitement and direction. And when my heart was reamed with sorrow at the loss of a father and friend, my church drew me to the Father of all the weary and assured me of the hope of another morning, eternal and tearless. And when love entered my life in the presence of a young woman, the church led me to her altar and to the vows which made of romance a covenant and a lifelong journey. And it is still there, quite apart from my vocation as a minister, in it, a spirit and presence and faces and voices, prodding and pushing and inspiring and consoling, still shaping me down through the years. The church has created me, and most of us more than we know. And that's good to know, because that means finally it's not of our doing or undoing. Its future does not depend solely on our faithfulness or ingenuity. It has been there, the church, this community of faith, often invisible, sometimes visible, for almost 2,000 years, and it'll be there long after we are gone and our names peer out from the stone behind the euonymus in the garden next door. It'll be there for us and our children, and pray God for our grandchildren whenever they need it. Whatever may come, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Hell, the anxiety of illness, the loneliness of loss, the guilt of failure, the estrangement of misunderstanding, the emptiness of defeat, the enervation of old age, the disappointments of life. That's hell, the real hell. But here is an army against which they do not finally stand. We experienced this last week. You'll permit me a personal note. One of our grandsons was struck down suddenly and very frighteningly with seizures of an unknown origin, which left him out of it for many, many hours, and it was scary and it was hard. But inner hope and strength, faith in God, were sustained by an incredible outpouring of phone calls and prayers, the sense of support we felt from a great invisible group of faithful gathered round us in spirit, with uplifted voices, and the gates of hell did not prevail, and by the gift of modern medicine, he shall be all right. By the way, that church was a lot bigger than we anticipated. If you've worried about the absence of prayer in public schools, you needn't quite so much. We know a school in a suburb north of here that was filled with prayer. As someone has said, you'll never get prayer out of the schools as long as you have friends there and exams. The church has created us in a profound sense. The church is there for us. Novelist Dan Wakefield, in a moving article in New York Times Magazine, describes his turn from despair to faith in the rediscovery of the community. He portrays a treacherous time in his life, a long-standing relationship with a woman had just dissolved, he was out of money, he just buried within the span of 7 months both his mother and his father, his work no longer satisfied, drugs had become an all too attractive means of escape. I was, he writes, headed for the edge of a cliff. Chance conversation in a neighborhood bar with a house painter who was looking for a place to go to Mass on Christmas Eve led Wakefield to attend a Christmas candlelight service, then to participation in other services of worship, and then Bible study, and to a gradually developing spiritual experience. As Wakefield's religious involvement increased, he says he experienced a growing freedom from his sense of drifting and purposelessness, and from what he called my assortment of life-numbing addictions. He writes, at some point or other along the way, they felt as if they were lifted. If there's any tragedy abroad in our time and culture, it's the growing inclination of many to try and survive without membership in the church. But wait a minute, I don't mean allegiance to some particular denomination. I don't mean the name on the roll of a particular congregation. I'm not promoting Kenilworth Union. I mean life apart from any real community of continuity and tradition and loyalty and love. I mean life isolated, life apart from faithful relationships with others of like faith and spirit. I mean life where personal advancement and individual desires are put above sharing and serving, where being and doing together takes backseat to the agendas and dictions and schedules and games of life on the North Shore. One little guy asked his father why he kept bringing home office work every night, obviously wanting more of Dad. Dad explained that he had so much to do he couldn't finish it during the day. And the boy finally asked, in that case, why don't they put you in a slower group? I mean life where ambition and obsession come before duty and obligation to neighborhood and institution and community in any form. A writer in New Yorker magazine, no less, pictures the scene out there graphically. What chills me about the future is a general sense of the transformation of our society from one that strengthens the bonds between people to one that is at best indifferent to them, a sense of an inevitable fraying of the net of connections between people at many critical intersections, of which the marital is only one. Each fraying accelerates another. A break in one connection, such as attachment to a stable community, puts pressures on other connections. Marriage, the relationships between parents and children, religious affiliation, a feeling of connection with a grander past. Did you know that only 3 to 5 Europeans now have any affiliation with a religious community of any kind? Did you know that according to latest studies, only 1 in 5 of Americans do? Most go their individualistic, isolated way. Most adolescents abandon church because competition and advancement count more, and they're so busy, and their friends don't go, and their parents don't seem to care much. Is it because we live in a time of such individual self-indulgence that we flee from the bonds and obligations? We chafe under any commitments or duties to real community? And it is tragic, because we are created and sustained by our communities of common faith and value. Any member in any of the 12-step programs knows what I'm talking about. Couples involved in a community of faith are 3 times less likely to divorce. Young people who are part of a strong Christian youth community are 10 times less likely to indulge in self-destructive behavior. The old story is right. We are not saved apart from community. Now, that does not mean that somehow we get to heaven if we got a membership certificate in our pocket in some specific church. That's not what we're talking about. Save yourselves from this corrupt generation, Peter cries. How, Peter? Tell us. Through life together, born of your faith in God, Give yourselves to one another, care for one another, if not here, then elsewhere, if not in some formal organization, then in informal times. What life do you have that is not life together, said T.S. Eliot. To try to manage on your own alone is to risk losing your soul in a secular pagan world. And so they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. The church has created us, and the church is there for us. And therefore, some of us, at least some of the time, must be there for it. Not everybody will be equally involved. There are stages in life, of course, and there are other schedules and responsibilities from time to time. But some of us must be there for it. Somebody has to nurture and sustain it in this age when so many are apathetic and indifferent. One man came regularly to church over many, many years until he died. He held no office. He was not equipped to sing or teach, but he could be, and he was always there. And he once apologized for me for not having done more, and told me with considerable wistfulness in his eyes that no one would ever know what the church had meant to him. And some joy came to those very same eyes when I could tell him that he would never know how much his loyalty had meant to me. It's not finally a matter of leadership, of clergy, of professional elites. The survival of the church has never rested there. Jesus built his church on the likes of Peter and Andrew and James and Martha and Mary. Spencer Morgan Rice, once rector of Trinity Church Boston, liked to tell the story of an Episcopal mission in Alaska, which illustrates how the official church is sometimes not very much like the real church. Its vicar, this little mission parish, was called to another, so the vestry started to correspond with the national office about the possibility of a new minister being sent up to the frozen north, and the national office wrote back encouragingly, but required the vestry to conduct a thorough self-study replete with a myriad and intricate forms as to their congregation's goals and objectives and how they envisaged their past and their present and their future. And though the vestry wasn't particularly happy with all this paperwork, they nonetheless complied and sent to New York the required documents, expecting to receive a minister shortly thereafter. But what they received back instead was another raft of forms that requested information regarding the kind of person they were looking for. And once again, they took congregational surveys and polls, and they filled out all the forms, and they sent them in, and still they got no word. And this went on for about 18 months with numerous letters and forms flying back and forth between New York City and this little Alaskan village. And finally, the vestry got together and fashioned a very simple letter which they sent off to New York. It said, "Forget the minister. We have found sinning is more fun." And they had a pastor in 10 days. But church, maybe we ought to forget the word, community, is about individuals of faith who take the time to care and to be there for one another. George Gallup tells the story of church. On a tree-lined, almost rustic road, an hour west of Chicago, Dottie Burrows lives with her husband and 4 children in an unremarkable brick ranch house. Their home, set back from the road, partly hidden by towering oaks, would be easy to miss. Not surprisingly, the middle-aged housewife is barely known beyond her circle of neighbors and friends. In some ways, she lives a simple, unspectacular life, but only in some ways, because she's one of a special group whose lives have had a quiet drama about them. These are everyday people who make often an extraordinary difference. When our 2.5-year-old son died, one of Dottie's friends remembers, Dottie was the one person who got me through it. She could tell by looking at me when I needed to talk, and I couldn't have gotten through it without her. Sarah Blaylock, another friend, remembers going into a dangerous premature labor with her 2nd child while her husband, to top it off, was also in the hospital. Dottie took me and my daughter in to live with her until my mother could get here from the east. And even friends to whom I was closer didn't offer to help quite like that. Mere helpfulness, however, does not quite explain all that's different about Dottie. Friends describe an indefinable radiance. Her eyes glow when she speaks of her faith, one observes. When it comes to her religious commitment, you can just see it in her. For all the good she does, almost no one beyond her immediate circle of friends, family, neighbors has even heard her name, even at the nearby Episcopal Church, where she helps lead a small Bible study group, teaches Sunday school, takes food to members in need. Dottie is not one of the first persons you're going to meet on Sunday morning. As she tells her own story, you soon sense that she has no illusions about her life. She admits that it's been a struggle at times, including the pain of a failed first marriage, a deeply disappointing miscarriage, and periods of religious doubt and uncertainty. Indeed, her first steps towards faith were seemingly accidental. As a child of 10, born into a non-church-going family, she ended up at church because it was the thing to do for girls of my acquaintance. During her teen years, typically, she gave up church, finding her way back only in adulthood. Even then, she remembers, I started going to church just because it felt good, and because if I didn't, I could tell a difference in my week, but often at worship, my mind was someplace else. But something happened to change all that. Dottie miscarried, and she recalls she went crazy with grief, and it was then that her nurse intervened. The nurse was a Christian, a member of the same congregation, and Dottie remembers that she gave of herself in a remarkable way. Even though she had a family, she would come and spend some time with me at my home on her day off. And I remember it was the first time I felt that there was a real difference in somebody who claimed to know Jesus. And through our talks, I realized my need for God, that I could not get through this grief without Him and His people. And that's really the way the church happens. In response to the Spirit of Jesus lurking in our hearts and passed on from friend to friend down the centuries. And in the 3rd century already, St. Cyprian wrote words to a friend that I think still strike terror into the heart of hell itself. He wrote to this friend, "This seems a cheerful world, Donatus, when I view it from this fair garden under the shadow of these vines. But if I climbed some great mountain and looked out over the wide lands, you know very well what I would see. Brigands on the high roads, pirates on the seas, in the amphitheaters, men murdered to please applauding crowds, under many roofs, misery and selfishness. It really is a bad world, Donatus, an incredibly bad world. Yet in the midst of it all, I've found a quiet and holy people. They have discovered a joy which is 1,000 times better than any of the pleasures of this world. They are often despised, but they care not, for they have overcome the world." These people, Donatus, are the Christians, and I am one of them. And so am I. And so are you. Amen.